I'm Jim Czek,
And I'm Renee Merrifield.
and we're here with Beyond the Ballot and a really jam-packed show as usual. Lots and lots to talk about. We're going to start in British Columbia, though. And this is huge. This is absolutely huge for all British Columbians. That decision that gave property rights away to, and that included personal residential property. I think that was Richmond, right?
Yeah, it was in Richmond. It was the Cowichan ban versus Canada. And the 896 page, I think it was, 800 and some pages decision that the justice made was basically saying that Aboriginal rights trumped property rights given by the Crown. This is monumental. It is absolutely frightening for anyone that owns property of any sort. And when I say anyone, I'm not just talking about the wealthy. I'm also talking about, the other co-defendants in this particular case, which was the Vancouver Port Authority or the airport or the city of Richmond and the city of Vancouver. This is monumental, and it's worth about $500 billion. That's $500 billion, and could have far-reaching effects if it's applied as law.
And so finally, the NDP is going to appeal that decision that attacks personal or private property rights. And that's, I guess, after the Conservatives kind of like really went to town on it. But this is huge, though. Like, I mean, if you're a property owner in British Columbia, like, I mean, if this one gets awarded, like, it'd be really tough to sell property if there's an over. So it's like somebody putting a covenant on your property. Like, what does it mean, actually?
You know, it basically is essentially you no longer own your property. At any point, a band could come in and say, we actually are asserting our title rights to that particular piece of property. This is already a slippery slope that the NDP has been on. They instituted UNDRIP or DRIPA. They also did the HIDA decision. That HIDA decision gave precedence, which is now being used for other bans. And that HIDA decision was actually acknowledged by this particular justice as well. This is a scary time for property rights, a scary time for the trajectory that we are on. Because when you have 3% of the population that is asserting ownership of 100% of the land base at any given time, that's going to be a very, very precarious position. And I don't know how the NDP walked this back, but right now there are only really legislative solutions to this particular problem. And I think that it's a big one for the NDP.
Yeah, because essentially, though, as a private property owner in BC, you bought that land basically from the BC government or Canada or what have you when you originally bought the land, and it changed hands several times, but it originally came from, you bought it from the government at one point. And then, so what's if this stands, what's the repercussions for property owners? Do they sue the BC government, or how do they get their money back for, this property?
Yes, every single property owner could sue the government once a title assertion was made. So they'd have to wait for a title assertion to be enacted. But then at that point, they could sue for damages. But it wouldn't necessarily just be the BC government, it'd be the Crown. So that's actually the Canadian government. This has such far-reaching effect. And I mean, I was saying to you at the beginning or right before the show, the 283 First Nations actually have claim to more than 100% of the land base right now. So they have overlapping claims, which is why you see, the different tribes that kind of came out, like, to actually work against in the lawsuit, the Cowichan tribe. So, you've got a lot of different forces at effect right now, and this could be just one big huge mess, and ultimately it's the property owners that would suffer.
Yeah. So is there a nation, though, if all the property doesn't belong to the people and the government that sold it? Because it's part of the reason for being of a government is actually owns the land, right? That sold it then to the private people or the privates. And then and then the whole, like, like we're talking about taxation, the whole thing, because the government has been taxing that land. So then if they didn't have a right to tax it, then they owe all those taxes back. You know what I mean? Like, if they were deemed like you don't have a right to the property, then you don't have a right to tax it as well.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular judgment, the justice lays out that really the title that the Aboriginal has should be able to coexist with, with those property owners, currently. That's an odd one. I don't understand what that means. She also asserts that the government is going to have to do the work of reconciliation. I don't understand what that means. Is this a one-time buyout? Is this the province of BC does not have $500 billion to give to the Cowichan Nation. So this is a really, really odd place and space to be in. Obviously, our port is at risk. Our airport is at risk. Our waterways are at risk. There's so much there that is currently at risk that I don't see a way out of this other than to legislate your way out of this. We would have to clarify Section 35 in the Constitution Act. That needs to be done right now. I mean, that is where UNDRIP and DRIPA has come from. We need to really define what that means for Aboriginal title to exist and what compensation requirements are. And then we need to legislate a comprehensive claims act where it's a once and for all, one and done. Now, the BC First Nations, and I've talked to many of the chiefs, are very reticent to do anything of this nature. In fact, that's why they don't want to sign treaties, because as soon as they sign a treaty, it's fixed, and their reconciliation of that land base is fixed. So they're very reticent to do that, because then they can, kind of assert land titles all over, as they see fit over time, and continue to receive compensation for some of that land base, but it's never actually fully resolved. So I think that having a comprehensive claims act would actually do something to then give us finality and settlements. But this is frothing to a head, and the NDP have been the ones that have been stirring this pot to such an extent. I'm very surprised that the justices seem to be veering really far on a liberal reading of our Constitution, on a liberal reading of Aboriginal title. With all due respect, it's a very scary time, and it's going to stymie business. It's going to absolutely, signal to the business community that right now it's just not a good time. You see the Walmart and the Wayfair and the Amazon, warehouses are all located within this property that's disputed. It's a scary, scary judgment.
And then BC doesn't have any money. It seems like, this is from the Fraser Institute, how did BC go from being one of the most fiscally sound provinces to one of the most indebted? And you were in government at the time when you guys had money, and all of a sudden we're racking up debt to like crazy. They just did a report there, and EB said, when they were campaigning. This is a little clip here. We're going to play this little clip here between Rustad, EB, and Firstenow. I'm just going to try and play this clip here.
Started with childcare for the middle class, getting rid of support for them. But what else is on the chopping block in the Rustad administration?
Sonia, first of all, thanks very much. And $24 billion is not responsible. They have no hope at all to get back to a budget. They have no hope whatsoever to get back to a balanced budget.
I know.
And that was just a small clip, because it turns out that EB inherited $89 billion from Horgan, but now that's up to like $133 billion.
EB has done more damage in a very short amount of time, and it's no shock. They've been spending themselves into oblivion. They have done things to really hold our resource sector back, hold revenues back, and have not replaced it with any meaningful economic stimuli. So, the opposition parties have been warning about this exact scenario. And sometimes, you seem kind of foolish, because it's like, well, we have a $5 billion budget. We're just spending the surplus. We're just spending the surplus. But we were sounding the alarm bell back then. This is the time that you save that surplus and you actually make, hold on to it and start putting it back into the cupboard so that the cupboard's full when you need it. And right now we are dealing with a dire economic situation and the cupboard is empty. And, that's exactly what the public accounts reporting said. It is very scary to see. It's very scary to see that they have blown through $3.9 billion in contingencies that they set aside for 2024-25 with very little regard and very little, accountability. So this is a difficult time. And I mean, September 15th, I do not envy, Minister Baileys' job, because that is going to be a very scary day when they actually have to do a reckoning on where they are to date.
Yeah, supposedly I get an interview as well. So they've said that they're going to do an interview. I do have the finance critic Peter Millibar this afternoon as well, and because he's saying that like this year alone, the NDP added $15.78 billion in new operating debt. And then what do they have to show for it? ERs are still closing, schools are crumbling, and ferries can't run on time. And we're also giving away the ferry stuff too. Like we're giving away and I want to ask him that question: how much economic spinoff? I talked about that in the past. Would that have generated for British Columbia if we would have been building the ferries here?
Oh, well, let me put it to you really simply: more than giving it to China.
Like that alone, just that, right? And but.
Yeah.
Brenda Baileys tried to use excuses. She tried to say, "Oh, it's Trump, Trump, Trump." But I mean, we all know, in finances, it's a look back, right? It's a reporting from before. So Trump really wasn't in the picture when all these problems happened. He's going to probably show up in the future stuff, and it's going to be even worse.
This report to public accounts was actually the final reconciliation for 24-25 budget, which ends at the end of March. So Trump was only in power for 10 weeks. I mean, we're talking 10 weeks out of 52. So it's pretty damning report, and this has nothing to do with Trump.
Yeah, the bigger problem is the revenues, right? Because in anything, in your finances, you got your revenues, expenses. Where are they going to find more revenues if they've been chasing capital out of this province and out of this nation, for that matter? I mean, we've been seeing capital flee. So if we can increase the revenues, and right now with tariffs, obviously that's even getting worse, right? Especially if one of the bigger industries in British Columbia is forestry, and that latest softwood tariff is going to hurt. Plus, their policies have hurt forestry for the past decade.
Their policies have hurt business, whether it's the natural resource sector or whether it's business in general. Their policies have injured the businesses. EHT, 5 personal sick days, higher taxes. The business community is just drowning underneath all of the weight of what this looks like. And in an environment where productivity is slipping and there isn't really anything positive. Then you look at like a monumental court case decision like we just got yesterday, or we look at the natural resource sector and the further laws on the environment that have been pushed against them, and the industrial carbon tax. There is no sector that is thriving right now in BC, and I would challenge anyone out there to show me a sector that is really thriving under the NDP government. And the problem here is that they are not going to be able to make an about face. So I see really, really dangerous times coming, because the only source that they're going to have is taxation. And under taxation, I mean, we already have had 33 different taxes increased or new taxes. I don't know where else they can get it from. The average citizen is being taxed, right now in an inordinate way. We're seeing, wealth flee the province right now because they're at a 53.6% tax bracket. I just don't see what's going to happen to really right the ship at this point.
And then the youth are fleeing as well. We're going to talk about that later. But I mean, that's your future tax base. And if it's leaving, the best and the brightest are leaving, and the capital is leaving. And then, I did see that deal that David Eby, it was kind of cringe, him and Wab Canoe there from Manitoba, they did that deal, and they said they're setting the example for putting deals together, and it was about wind power. And it's just like, and I don't understand how they don't look at what's beneath the feet here in British Columbia, and that's our resources. I did do an interview with a mining guy and talking about, some of the mining here, but even in that, the United States, Alaska, and Nevada are eating our lunch there. And first of all, the best place to invest for mining right now, they say, is Finland. Not even British Columbia. British Columbia way down on the list. And so this guy was a public company, had several properties, but they were focusing their attention in Nevada.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the common story. Investment dollars are fleeing. We've got Stats Canada, which is telling us that we're in a $2.8 billion deficit. Between dollars coming in and dollars going out in terms of those investment dollars. Scary. And that's a deficit. You're looking at $13.4 billion total in May that left Canada. So we have a really, really concerning issue here that, there is no confidence in the investor dollars and in businesses in general. It was a really interesting on LinkedIn. Arlene Dickinson wrote a really great piece, and I encourage you to go and read, what she said. But she says, what I'm hearing is scaring because it feels like quiet defeat about Canada in and amongst business. She says, people have built incredible companies and who I count on for clarity when things get cloudy. But what I'm hearing, though, from them is that, it's just quiet defeat. So, we're talking about businesses that are losing steam and that are moving to other places. I recently had a dinner with a business leader out of Ontario, and they were saying to me, Renee, you got to get to the U.S. You got to get out of the four walls of Canada as soon as you possibly can. They're just talking about survival now. It's not about increasing the bottom line.
Yeah, and then the BC Ferry one, I wanted to talk about that because here was, like if you talk about the feds and you talk about the BC government, they're talking about, we got to build Canada stronger. And here we had this opportunity with the BC Ferries contract, a $4 billion deal. And we sent that to China. And I know Dan Elvis is doing a ton of work on this. So is some of the local the journalists here in BC, Rob Shaw, on that. There's big pushback from some of the unions now too, and saying like that this has been unfair. Like they say that like nobody. EB said nobody else bid on it, but I mean you and I have talked about this too. Why would you bid on it if cost is one of the drivers and you can't compete with the environmental standards, the industrial carbon tax? BC companies can't compete with China, who get to have human rights violations, all kinds of things.
No, and an RFP that prioritizes cost over everything else. And I mean, there should have been things like human rights or quality of steel or, carbon emissions as table stakes, and then evaluate cost. And
threat to Canada. Threat to Canada. Right? Yeah. Are you a threat to Canada?
And this was an unfair tender, a tender that valued cost over everything else, and a tender that literally did not value the things that we are all put, and as I just described to businesses today, all of the bureaucracy that they labor underneath, whether that's taxation, whether that's human rights, whether that's all of the things that we hold near and dear for us, should be what we spend our money on as well. And this one is a terrible misstep by this government and by BC Ferries.
And the economic spinoff, though, because we talk about a $4 billion project. How much what's the typical factor that the government puts on, economic spinoff? So you pay your welders, you pay your all these companies around, and then they go and spend it at the bakery, and then they go and spend it at the hairdresser and wherever, and they go buy trucks and all that stuff. How much of that is not being answered by David Eby too when he said they were just the cheapest? Like when BC is starving for jobs in the economy, how can they justify sending that $4 billion to work in a different country?
Well, my hope is that they do have an answer for that. They went on record a year and a half ago saying that the shipbuilding industry was one of the industries that they really wanted to focus on. Surely they have some economic data as to why that is the case and what sort of spin-off effect those jobs have on our economy. So I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that they have done that math and they do understand what that means. And then to simply put this, and give this money to another country to do all of that economic gain, is absurd. It is absolutely absurd. I don't know how else to say it. And you know, we haven't even dealt with the indirect aspects of a country that's not necessarily super friendly with Canada right now. So yeah, and who could be a security threat, and who is not a friend necessarily to our neighbors to the south, who are not happy with our relationship with them. So, you know, giving them another $4 billion doesn't seem like a savvy move to make at this point. But I'll just give you an example. In the housing industry, for every $1 million, and million, not billion, but $1 million that we spend, it equates to 9 direct jobs and another 5 indirect jobs. So that's 14 jobs total for a year. So, I mean, you can just do that as an order of magnitude and try and figure out what that factor is when you factor in the steel industry. So that's going to be mining, that's going to be smelters, that's going to be, you know, manufacturers, that's going to be, you know, whether it's bolt manufacturers or panel manufacturers or welders or millwrights. I mean, there are so many different aspects to that and jobs that are created. I mean, the economic spinoff to $4 billion, I mean, you probably could give that, you know, a magnifier of 4 to 5 times that in terms of economic input.
Yeah, we did a video during COVID there in Canola. We followed $100 around, and we just, you know, showed how much economic activity $100 could generate. And there's factors as high as 10 for some people that have said, you know, depending on if that money stays in the local economy. Because, you know, like when you spend money into the U.S., like McKinsey & Co. and different things, it leaves, right? Or even Amazon, it leaves the community. But, you know, if you spend it, you know, in servicing, like you say, you got a carpenter, and then the carpenter then goes and gets his tires fixed, and then, you know, buys a car, and you get all this money just keeps working in the economy, generating economic activity. That is the whole premise of a sound financial system. That's why they say when you give money to young people, they generate economic activity. You give it to old people, they put it in the bank, and it's dead money, right? So, like, you know, that's why, you know, the money is best spent with the youth, and then because they will generate economic activity, as opposed to older people that have enough money, they put it in the bank and it just kind of dies there, right? So.
Yeah, agree 100%. Yeah, and this is even further different than that, is that these are jobs. So this is, you know, meaningful employment, and yeah, and food for families. So I hope that the unions speak out. I hope that the companies that weren't able to bid because of unfair RFP practices are you know, keep this government held to account.
And one of the things that we have too is, like, for families aren't having kids, and one of the things we see in wildlife, in good times, wildlife has lots of kids, offspring. In bad times, they don't. And that's the same thing. When people can't afford to have kids, we talked about this in the past too, is that they're putting off kids, they're putting off vacations, they're putting off purchases and everything, because the activities or the economic climate is so bad. And that's where we're seeing right now. There's been a video that was a good video actually done by Global, where they're showing, you know, Alberta had those videos advertising Alberta's calling. And the amount of youth that has been fleeing British Columbia is just crazy. You know what I mean? Because it's, you know, like cheaper housing there, better jobs, lower taxation, lots of reasons for our youth to leave, but not good for British Columbia though.
Well, and one of my kids said, you know, when they were considering where to live for the next segment of their education, they said, look, we can be cash flow positive in Calgary, or we could be cash flow negative in Vancouver. You tell us what we should do. You know, I mean, it is a reality for them when they are looking at equal wages, but cost of living and cost of housing is so much less expensive. Of course, they're going to go somewhere else. And, you know, I mean, I went somewhere else when I was younger. I went and found a job. My parents went and found jobs is somewhere that was, you know, more plentiful, right? Like, so it is something that happens. The goal of any society, of any government, of any province is to stimulate your economy so that you don't lose your next generation, and that you actually stay sustainable. And that's the trajectory that we're not on right now. We are simply not sustainable. We're losing our youth, and and we don't have those incomes to actually support the services that our elderly require.
Yeah, as a 19-year-old during the 1980 there, I think, when that interest rates were at 18, 19%, there was no jobs. There was 50 guys lined up at the Midway Mill there every day looking for a job, and there was no jobs. I hadn't worked in a year. That was the only time I was on unemployment. I was an artist for the government drawing unemployment for a full year there. And I finally ran out of unemployment, and I had no choice but to pack my matching luggage. I think it was 2 Glad garbage bags. Got on a bus and went to northern Alberta and got a job the first day. And not a great job. I got a job as a dishwasher. I call it a silver and ceramics technician. But then that job led to another job, and another job. And I worked in the oil field and carpentry and all that. At least in northern Alberta at the time, there was enough jobs that I had mobility and I could choose. I kept moving up, right? But I never didn't have a job after that day, you know what I mean? Like I worked from that on, but there was a year in British Columbia where there was no work at all, and people were, I think I baled hay and did whatever I could, but those were like, like a week job here, a week job there, and stuff like that. So it was tough times.
It's scary times. And when you look at those unemployment numbers, everyone's like, well, we're not that bad. It's only like 6.9. The reality is that when you look at those statistics, the younger generation, the 18 to 25-year-olds, the unemployment rate among them is over 20%. That's scary times. And I remember thinking back when I would see those same numbers in Spain or Portugal or Italy, and then they would talk about the crime rate going up, or they would talk about the despondency, they would talk about the immigration happening, and people leaving those countries, and I would think to myself, oh, thank goodness we're not there, and I'm looking at these statistics going, oh my goodness, we're there. We are literally there right now.
And that's where unrest comes too. You see it in France, you see it in places. When the youth don't have opportunity, I mean, they've been complaining for years, and Liberals have ignored it. They've been complaining for years that they can't afford a house. That has been gone, like, unanswered, right? They keep telling you, they give them kind of lip service to it. And then the same thing in the jobs market too. Like our greatest strength is our energy, and energy is everything. We talk about this all the time. Energy is everything. I just watched a clip on AI, the former Google CEO Eric Schmidt saying, like, it's all about energy. Every country's prosperity and future in AI is all about energy. It's absolutely about energy. Like they want 96 gigawatts they need. So that's 96 nuclear power plants they need right away for this to fuel this energy need. And you know how long it takes to build a nuclear power plant, right? but here we're sitting on LNG. We're sitting on this energy here. And we just have this aversion to tap into it.
Yeah, and it's energy, but it's prosperity. It's actually jobs. I mean, you described why you went to northern Alberta for jobs. There are jobs that could be created with this energy and this energy usage. But there's also technological advances that could be done. And you mentioned how AI needs energy to move forward. We are so far behind the 8 ball. I mean, we're talking about small wind projects. And it's not an either or, it's an and. So I want us to be firing on all cylinders all the time and have an excess of energy. And right now we do not. We have less than what we actually require.
Yeah, if we had a serious look at it, the government had a serious look at it, BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan could be playing huge roles in the future of not of just Canada, but of the world as far as our energy, because of like the copper, the lithium, the uranium, the LNG, the oil and gas, the oil, all that stuff is all there, and there's no fast track. Carney's been in office for a while now, but there's no deal signed. There's nothing. We talk lots of slogans. He made fun of Pierre about slogans, and all I hear is slogans, and I don't see anything signed yet or anything where we're getting anything off the ground, and it's just disheartening. And as to what we could be and how we could factor in the world stage too.
Yeah, I mean, Carney is going to have to get moving really quickly, and he has missed every deadline that he's created for himself. And it's scary that he doesn't really seem to have a plan yet. We don't see the way forward. There isn't really a lot going on. Yes, he put some of the softwood lumber supports in place. Again, where does that come from? What tax dollars are going to be used to make that happen? Because right now we're in a deficit position federally. So any of these new dollars are coming from taxation. It's not coming from actually the economic generators. And in fact, these companies are saying, well, this is what we'll use to stay alive. Let me tell you, a company that is staying alive is not profitable. They are not out there making huge dollars that they're then repaying to the government. So I think this is just more of the same where they're giving away money and don't have a lot to show for it in terms of economic gain.
Yeah, the softwood lumber stuff is corporate welfare, really. Because, I mean, you could prove it to me that it's investment. If Canfor said we're going to go ahead with that Houston mill, then I would say, okay, now I believe you, right? But if it's just like, here's some corporate welfare, some cheap loans for you to kind of just hang on and hope for a better day, that's not investment, right? That's just corporate welfare. And you mentioned before we went on that there was a report there out of the Globe and Mail talking about lost opportunity for youth. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
Yeah, it was a great article that said gone is the first job for our youth. And it basically was signaling, like, with this high of an unemployment rate amongst our youth, they're aging out of having their first jobs. They're not able to get employment. And, I thought about that and I said, well, why? Why wouldn't companies hire youth? And, we here at Troika, we have an intern program that we run. We do it with Okanagan College and UBCO. We hire co-op students, but it's hard work. It's really hard work. And as the minimum wage has gone up, and as we're looking at all of the different, 5 paid personal days and all these different elements that we have to give them, it becomes a very costly venture for not a lot of output. I think that, I don't think we're unique. I think other companies are looking at this same metric. And when you look at the number of waiting tables or your general labor jobs, we're just not seeing those taken up by our younger, generation. We're seeing those taken up by 35-year-olds. And so suddenly they're being really timed out of their first job. And that's going to hurt them in perpetuity because, then they go to apply when they're 25. They still don't have that really critical experience pathway that allows them to be employable. And so it's a very dangerous trajectory that we're on here.
And the immigration didn't help either. The out of control immigration, that unprecedented levels of immigration, which some world organizations have called modern day slavery here in Canada, that had pushed down wages so bad. Unions have said the same thing, that Canada, some of the lobbyists have used Canada as a dumping ground for cheap labor.
Well, cheap labor, we're still more expensive than China. That's why the ferries went there.
Just how bad that is, though, right? So.
Yeah, and I would say that our minimum wage is actually pretty significant. It's pretty high. So even our slave wages are pretty.
There's a lot of people working under the table. We've seen lots of charges, federal charges against companies. There was one I think it was in Fox Creek where they weren't paying them and stuff like that. When you have people that are illegally here as well and stuff like that, so then they can kind of be abused more so. And then, well, let's just turn our focus to healthcare, which has been another sore spot for the BC NDP. And this has been, you highlighted this issue for, I think, one of the first people to highlight it here in Interior Health, where we saw the resignation of Susan Brown, the CEO here. But here we see it also in the Fraser Health. They let go of Dr. Victoria Lee, but she leaves with a golden parachute. She leaves with $600,000 in severance payout and plus another $52,000 in vacation payout. Pretty good deal for her.
Yeah, I don't understand what they're gaining here. To let a CEO go, there's got to be a change in trajectory that they want to assert, which is that she's not doing. So to let a CEO go, it's not like you're not going to have another CEO take the reins. So what I'd love to see are, out of the 14 vice presidents in every health authority, I'd love to see them say, you can only have 5. And you have to let all the rest of them go and amalgamate their portfolios into 5 sectors. Because that way they're not going to get replaced and you're not going to have those dollars. Getting rid of her and paying her severance is only, you still have to replace that position. So it's not going to save the taxpayers any money. I don't know what she did that, I was reading some of the articles and they were singing her praises about how much work she's done for other organizations and how she's been recognized internationally. So I don't know what they're doing. This is not a move that seems super smart to me. It seems like a very odd one to me. And again, like to get rid of 2 CEOs, they're being replaced, so you're not actually saving any money, but you are going to cost the taxpayers a lot of severance. And when Victoria Lee's came forward and was shown as $609,000, I think it was, that is a massive amount of money.
Yeah, there's been too many of these severance packages. And I think I read that it was a mutually decided resignation or firing or whatever you want to call it, leaving. And then obviously there's NDAs probably in there. And, and again, the taxpayer is the one that picks up the dime on the whole thing. And the healthcare crisis in BC is just getting worse.
And we've got Penny Bellum, who's supposed to be in there to drive efficiencies. That was her mandate by the minister. And so far, I'm not seeing it. In fact, if anything, I'm seeing more ER closures in the Lower Mainland, whether it's Delta or Richmond. Our ERs are closed all the time. We've got pediatric wards down. Maternity care is almost non-existent. Not non-existent. The ones that we have here are working full tilt, but they literally cannot take on another baby. And so they're sending patients elsewhere. We have a really, really, really bad healthcare system right now. So I do not understand how we are trying then to make things better with these firings. And I think it was like 51 people let go and 60 some, and I might have the numbers incorrect, so forgive me if they're a little bit off, and then 60 some that were vacancies that were not going to be filled. So that is a lot of slush in there. But so far I haven't seen the results on the front lines with more nurses, more doctors, more support staff, and more care being given.
And I believe one of Evie's promises was a family doctor for all British Columbians in 2025, and he's running out of time.
He's running out of time, and I don't know where that list exists today. It'll be interesting if we get to go through estimates again to see where that number is updated to. And that's another thing that's getting a little hinky, is that we're seeing these governments that are not giving us full access to their numbers, and not being as transparent as we'd like to see them. Dix, love him, hate him. He had a lot of transparency in what he was producing, and really tried to give some numbers at certain points, and use those as markers, and give his surgical updates, etc. And since Josie Osborne took over last October, I haven't seen one of those being done.
Yeah, no, it's scary, scary, scary as far as healthcare goes in British Columbia, and and I don't see much improvement right now as far as the ER closures. We get those press releases all the time, and it just seems like they just keep coming.
Yeah, and I wish that everyone could walk through a hospital, whether it's KGH or Jubilee or, any of our hospitals here, whether it's St. Paul's or Children's, people need to walk through the hospitals and understand the level of care that's being given right now. It's scary times, and it's not our healthcare professionals. Our healthcare professionals want to do a great job. They are doing their darndest. They are working their tails off to deliver a great standard of care, but they are thwarted by operational inefficiencies, by how the actual facilities are being run, and it is a very difficult time right now in healthcare. And I mark my words, Jim, you can hold me accountable to this one. Just like I leaked this story or broke this story, I will say, I think healthcare over the next 10 years is going to be the number one issue for Canadians and for British Columbians. Our economy and our healthcare system are going to be neck and neck. And as we have less and less dollars coming in, we're going to have less and less dollars to support our healthcare system.
And our aging population, it will demand more healthcare, and that's one of the bigger drivers in that. Let's shift our focus to the national level, and Mark Carney was in town. He was actually in town last we were actually live at that time, and he was out there in West Kelowna. I know they called it Kelowna, but it was West Kelowna. And he was at Gorman's Mill there making an announcement, and we got one question, no follow-up. We had two questions to ask. We had two questions when we sent there. One was Bill C-18, which we think is the most important question in Canada for us for free and independent media. And the second was on the BC ferries. We were only allowed to ask one. We thought for sure somebody would ask the BC ferries question. But let's play the clip here when our reporter, Steve McNull, got to ask the one question.
Good morning. Steve McNull from Kelowna Now. It was referenced here earlier today, the Peachland wildfire. Yeah. And it brought crystal clear again to local media how we disseminate information quickly and effectively. Bill C-18 stands in our way to get back onto Facebook and Instagram. Are the Liberals looking for an alternative or rescinding that so that we can get that news back on those important platforms?
I'll say this, Steve. Thank you for the question. First thing, and one of the things that we have done, and I'll answer your specific question, but let me make a point on something we have done, which is, and you may not like this part of the answer, but I'm going to give it to you, which is that one of the roles of CBC Radio Canada is to provide unbiased, immediate, local information, particularly in terms of in situations such as you're referring to, and that's one of the reasons why we've made the commitment to invest and reinforce and actually change the governance of CBC Radio Can to ensure that they are providing those essential services. Now, to your specific question, I personally, and this government is a big believer in the value of what you do. I'm going to use you as a representation on local news, and the importance of ensuring that is disseminated as widely and as quickly as possible. So we will look for all avenues to do that. And I understand your question, and it's part of our thinking around that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Jim.
You know what? Here's the thing: how many outlets do you think picked that story up across Canada?
Oh, zero.
How many outlets? Because this is the most important thing. In a free and democratic country, you need a free and independent media. Yeah. I think the National Post picked it up. And you know what? For the most part, people just want to pretend it doesn't happen, right? Like, unbiased CBC, come on.
Yeah,
right?
The things that I noticed about this is, number one, Stephen Fear looked down when
he was nervous as all heck.
Yeah, so that was interesting to me to watch, and I know that he. That
he's come out and said twice that the Bill C-18 should be repealed. He said that to us, like we did the interviews.
Yeah, and so then the other thing I would say is that I would love to know what Carney's referencing with a governance change of CBC. I don't understand that at all. I mean, there is no real governance change there. I don't understand, and it's not delivering more unbiased information. So that to me is very strange. And I mean, Carney is an economist, so Carney understands that you follow the money, and wherever the money is coming from, that is the leaning of that organization. So for CBC, the money is coming from the government, which is why it is going to lean towards, promoting what the government says and promoting what, a positive front for the government. So I don't understand. I guess he just assumes that people are not super smart. But what I will tell you is that the public doesn't believe him, because the public isn't watching CBC. The public is not drinking that, red and black Kool-Aid. They are looking for other sources. They are looking for, for their, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Google, whether it's AI now. I mean, people are looking for other media, and and I think that we will continue to see this intention until the CBC is no longer funded. The CBC should exist, and I'm not about saying that they shouldn't exist. They just shouldn't receive government funding.
Yeah. At least he was honest, as opposed to when we asked the question when Trudeau was, I think, in West Kelowna as well, where Trudeau just went on this long tirade about how, he's fighting the evil empire Meta, and they will not spend a dime, and, they're fighting for local journalism, and they're doing all these things. Meanwhile, since January, the Liberals and Mark Carney have spent over $5 million, that's the last time we checked, $5 million on Meta, because they said that the Meta platform is too important to ignore to get the messaging out. It's just like comedy, right? And then he said they're investing in the CBC to get more journalism in local community. The CBC barely does anything in this local community, like in any community. Like, they cover national stories, and they do a decent job at that sometimes. But being unbiased is definitely like a stretch, and I think Steve did the stories and put quotations around unbiased CBC. Like, it was clear to see how biased they are, including some of their journalists have just quit and said they're so biased that he had to quit or forced resignation.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to see that. There's going to continue to be tension. And, I brought that up when I was the critic serving at that time. in the BC legislature, because it was a similar situation. How can we deny, British Columbia residents the access to immediate sources? This was a huge fumble by the government, and I still think that we need to rectify it. And the only way we're going to rectify it is by, the only way that it will be rectified is if there's a change in government.
So again, I'll just make this last thing here. Free and independent media is essential for a democratic country to have real democracy. And the only way to get that is repeal Bill C-18, stop all government funding of media, and free the media from their reliance heavily. We see this. We're even seeing it right now play out in this fire bans in the West here. But we can move past that. China announces another 75% tariffs on canola here, and like that. Look, and we got a chart here showing what canola did right after that in Canada here, and canola is a tough note. If it's, I don't know if you have it. It's down $39 there, like 6%. But canola is a tough market to get. Do you know what I mean? Like those canola markets aren't easy to develop, right? Like those aren't like easy to find replacements for. And what's going on in the U.S., like the people next door to us too, they got a lot of canola to sell as well. So tough, very much silence though too from the Carney Liberals.
That is just what I was going to say. Is like honestly, what is deafening is the silence. So far we've heard about, manufacturing, or, we've heard about copper, but when it comes to, the grains of the prairies, this government's been very silent. And, we have continued to see these tariffs increase and be absolutely brutal for these industries. So, we got to figure this out. And, if you want to wear a tinfoil hat just for a minute, you kind of go, okay, well, why would China have an interest in, in basically, squelching
our industry,
this industry, like a food. I don't know. Let's think about it. Like, you kind of go, this just doesn't feel right. And why Carney's quiet is also just not feeling right. This should be on front page news everywhere, and we should be doing something about it. But again, Carney was like, well, I'll call Trump when I feel like the time is right. We are literally getting X'd out of everything. And you and I talked last week about, the emissary that went to Mexico. The next headline was Mexico is like, we don't need a side deal with Canada. Like, there's nothing for us to gain there. And it's like, oh yeah, right. Okay, well, thanks for the visit. It's the most ridiculous thing ever.
We got some photo ops.
Yeah. So, right now we are absolutely, there is no elbows up. We are like knuckles dragging. I don't even understand what's going on right now with our negotiations, and the silence is deafening. And meanwhile, China and the US are having their way with our industries, and with really no trade routes to take their place.
And this one I thought I'd never see in Canada, like not in a wartime where actually they're putting this out now, like Canadians overwhelmingly in favor of mandatory national service for young adults. Like, because they can't get people to join the military. The Americans are getting now record enrollment or in their military because they put pride in their military. They invest in the military, they have good equipment, they have good education, they have all these things, and they're, the top military in the world. So it's a lot easier to get people to join the military. We've underfunded, under-equipped, and then underpaid our military. And now they're talking about, again, what is it? The boomers are going to force our kids into the military?
Well, and I'm going to say this. This might be not a very popular, perspective, but I would challenge you. I would love to know, and I could go and understand these statistics. Who voted and what age groups were they that voted that that this was going to be instituted, or that they wanted this instituted. Sorry, I should say. I was just at a dinner party, and there were some Italians, there were some Portuguese there, and they were all talking about how their parents left during those childbearing years so that their kids would not be conscripted into the military. this is a great way to lose your next generation.
I was going to say they're going to flee just like that. They're
already
leaving province to province. Now they'll just leave the nation, right? And they've already said it is. And again, it's the boomers that have sold Canada out for the Liberals this time, because like the youth wanted a change in government. It's the boomers that said, oh no, we like it the same. And it seems like the boomers during COVID were the ones that were super vocal about locking people down. And we're seeing that over and over again right now. We're seeing this with this, I don't want to get into it too much, but we're seeing it with this wildfire thing. It's the boomers and the media that are just screaming at people. They're using the same lines they used during COVID, about how you're selfish and you're this and that and another thing. And it's just ridiculous. And I know a lot of youth that would leave Canada if all of a sudden they were conscripted into the military. And I don't know who these people are. Pay them well, encourage them to incentivize them to join the military, make the military proud.
You want to hear my idea?
Sure.
Here's my idea. Give them a house when they leave their time. So let them work for, let's call it 7 years. And then at the end of it, you give them a house. And you can choose from these 7 different areas, and you can go
give them an incentive as opposed to a stick, right?
Yeah, totally. So you give them a stick. I mean, I have 4 boys, 2 stepsons and 2 of my own, and I would tell them all to leave Canada. I mean, 2 of them could right away because they have other ethnicities for parents, but I would strongly recommend that they leave.
The Bank of Canada, it sounds like, there's a lot of bets out there now that they're probably going to drop rates to 2.25% by the end of the year. I mean, I think they need to. They absolutely need to. And I think, again, I would say, they haven't dropped because the U.S. hasn't moved. And I believe that the traders are betting that the inflation numbers came in pretty tame again in the U.S., that Powell has no choice but to drop. And, they're saying it's politically motivated down there. But I believe the Americans are going to drop, and I believe that's what's been holding back Canada, because, I mean, the economy needs it. The economy desperately needs a rate cut.
Yeah, each time there's been, right before a rate cut, each time, they've had these odd statistics that have kind of shown a different light at the end of the tunnel, that they think, oh, well, jobs number was really good in June, so we're not going to. And then all of a sudden jobs numbers are horrific in July. So, you kind of go, I wish that the Bank of Canada was a little bit better. But even in Stephen Politz's book, he talks about, how right they are and how they're just putting it into these formulas, and how, and these different models, and how the models don't work anymore for how things are going, and with immigration numbers where they are, et cetera. So, I don't think it's a perfect science. I think it's more of an art. And I think that if we're looking at what the economy needs right now, it's definitely, some lower interest rates. And I think we're gonna be seeing that in very short order.
I believe that they're just picking excuses no different than Brenda Baileys when she's trying to justify why the deficit's like that. The Bank of Canada's doing that too, because I believe the only thing they were looking at is the lockstep with the United States, because the U.S. hasn't moved for a long time, and it definitely causes some disparity there when you drop one, and it does affect the currency as well. So I think they're waiting for the Americans to drop the rate, and obviously it is the dog that wags, or we're not the tail that wags the dog, right? So
yeah, totally. Can I respond to one of the
Sure.
listeners here? I'll say, Ian, I think you make a really good point about you being a boomer and being a boomer in Western Canada and voted against the Liberals. My parents were boomers and they voted against the Liberals too. So I know that there were many of them. I am speaking in broad generalities, and in broad generalities, when you look at the voting population for who voted for the Liberals, you can see there were 60% of that age demographic that voted for the Liberals, and then 60% of the younger that voted for the Conservatives. So you're right; there are always going to be a multiple of differences, but yeah, speaking in generalities.
Well, that's been good. I do have Peter Millibar. I guess he's on right now, so he's here. So
say hello. Say Renee says hi.
I will. I sure will. All right. Thanks, Renee, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna